Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited for this chance I have to share with you this session on integrating all the things. You notice the exclamation point because we really are going to integrate all of the things. This is going to be fun, very jam-packed, so let's get started. To start with, I'm Jeff Holland. I'm a program manager for Microsoft Azure working on Logic apps. So today we're going to be focusing primarily on API apps and Logic apps, but we are going to integrate with as much stuff as we can. So we'll be playing with some event hubs, stream analytics. You see I've brought my own IoT device, which is a Raspberry Pi, we'll be integrating with as well. So there'll be a lot to go over. To start with, what are Logic apps? You might not be familiar. Logic apps is a new service that we just launched in Azure a few months ago that's currently in preview that allows you to quickly integrate and create workflows within the cloud to perform some pretty complex operations. So you can trigger off of events, you can integrate across custom-built or on-premise APIs to achieve some great tasks, integrate with analytics engines, do this all within a web designer as well. We provide a designer for you to create these integrations to make it as easy and quick as possible. So honestly, the best way to explain Logic apps is just to show you an example. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to my new Logic app. This is a blank Logic app. You can start from some templates, but I just want to point off on the right here, we have a list of all of the different APIs that we support from our marketplace that you can deploy straight into your subscription. You'll see services here like SAP, Twitter, Dropbox, OneDrive, Salesforce, right? There's a lot. This is a long list to allow you to quickly pop these things into your Logic app. And we've got some customers doing some really exciting things. I just saw a blog post today around a customer who is used Logic apps to help trigger events when there's an anomaly in their Azure Active Directory. So as their Active Directory says, hey, we kind of got some weird login patterns here, they can have a Logic app pop off, input stuff into database, send alerts, do whatever they need. So for this scenario, though, what I want to do today is let's pretend that you've set up a mobile service or a mobile app, and it's the greatest app or service in the world because it's built on Azure. And all you're doing is at some point, you're letting customers sign up. And when customers sign up, you're adding them to a SQL database, right? Pretty standard, pretty uneventful, but let's make it exciting. Let's make it eventful. So I want to have a Logic app that occurs whenever a customer gets added to this database. So for the trigger of my Logic app, this could be time-based, this could be an HTTP request, but for this instance, I want this to trigger whenever a record is added into SQL. So I'm going to go ahead and add this trigger to poll this SQL database every 15 seconds to see if I've added a new customer. Now, the first time you add a connector, it's going to ask you a few provisioning settings, like what's the database you want us to point to and the tables and so on. I already took the time to do that before we started. But you'll notice, and if you're familiar with API apps actually leverage Swagger, which is JSON metadata around the API itself. And so you have some Swagger around what are the methods that this API supports, what are the inputs, what are the outputs. So you'll see here with this SQL one, when I provisioned it, it knows and it's telling us the structure of the data that this API is going to return, because Logic apps will consume that Swagger and tell us, hey, when you get a customer, you're going to have their name, their phone number. And these are properties that are going to be good for me to know as I continue to create this workflow. So let's say this is a new mobile app that I've started. And so I personally want to get an email whenever I get a new customer. I'm definitely that kind of person, right, who's always clicking refresh whenever I post anything new to see how many people have seen it. So let's go ahead and add this Office connector. And I'm going to go ahead and send an email to myself. You got a new customer. And we will say the customer's name is... Now, I mentioned we're pulling some metadata about the data. So if I actually click this menu here, it's going to list some of the properties that Logic apps is going to know about at this point. And so I'm actually going to substitute in the name of the customer into this message. And this is going to generate the syntax needed so that at runtime, this code is going to be swapped out with the actual name of the customer. Now, I'll dive a little bit deeper into the syntax a little bit later on. But for now, we're just going to send myself an email. Let's add another step here. Let's say I use a CRM system, in this case, Salesforce. And maybe anytime I add a customer, I want to be able to quickly create an entity in Salesforce. So let's just quickly, for the sake of time, I'm just going to leave these blank. But you see, we've already, like in what, 2 or 3 clicks, now we're integrating with Salesforce. There's another service that's really nice that we support out of the box, which is Twilio. And Twilio provides APIs to send telecommunications. So a popular one, you see we've got a lot of actions we could do, but I'm just going to send a text message. And let me actually pull out the number I want to send from right here. And we're going to send to that customer's phone number. And let's just give them a thanks for joining message. Okay, great. So again, now we've integrated with another service. And finally, to make this fun, I mentioned I have my Raspberry Pi. Let's send a message to the Raspberry Pi to let it know, hey, we got a new customer. I've got a light here connected to it, which can blink. And how I actually like to do this from Logic Apps is I actually just send a message into an Azure Service Bus queue. And this Raspberry Pi just has like 10 lines of Python code from the Azure SDK where it just loops and checks that queue. And if there's a message for it on the queue, then it says, hey, do your action. And if there's no message, it doesn't have to do anything. So this is nice because the Raspberry Pi doesn't have to know anything about my SQL database, doesn't have to know anything about all these web systems. But through Logic Apps, I can easily send it a message. Let me make sure that message is right. That's right. And now we're integrating with IoT. And now this Raspberry Pi has a great brain so that this light will flash whenever I add a new customer. Okay, let's go ahead and save this and take a step back and realize that in just the first few minutes, we took what once was just adding customers into a SQL database. And now we're integrating with online CRM, we're sending emails, we're sending text messages, we're even interfacing with IoT, right? This is just showing you how quick and easy you can integrate your services inside of Azure Logic Apps. So let's test this out. Let's go ahead and add a new customer. And I've got a script here to add this customer into the SQL database. And so within 15 seconds, this Logic app is going to go see that we've added that customer, send an email, add a record in Salesforce, send a text through Twilio, and send a record to this device. Now there is about a 15, there could be 15 seconds to when this shows up on the queue, and then sometimes the Raspberry Pi takes some time to find it. But I would bet in just a few seconds, you'll notice that this light, after these other steps have completed, will start flashing. So I'm going to go ahead and start the next part while we wait for the Raspberry Pi to pick up this message. Let me make sure that it succeeded first. So if we come here to here, we succeeded, we sent the message. So it's sitting on the queue waiting for the Raspberry Pi to pick it up. And again, there might be some network stuff. When you're presenting, you never know what the Wi-Fi is like. So for now, I'm just going to leave it for there. And if it picks it up, great. If it doesn't, no worries. Let's go ahead and open this Logic app back up in our designer. And let's continue to build this out. Let's integrate with some more services. All right, while this loads. This is just sitting there waiting on the queue for this Raspberry Pi to pick up. It's breaking my heart that I'm guessing it's a Wi-Fi issue, that the Raspberry Pi's lost connection to Wi-Fi, but that's okay. All right, let's go ahead and add an event into our Azure Event Hub. So here's what I want to do now. Another popular use of Logic apps that we're working with customers is to process high-value things. Like maybe you have stuff that's happening in your Logic app that's really important, like purchases. Whenever you make a purchase, there's a lot of steps or APIs that you have to interface with. But if something happens, you want to understand, where did this purchase fail? How far did I get? If a customer has questions, you want to know what that is. And we provide a lot of information for you. But there's more that you can do. You can integrate with services like Event Hub to get some really rich information. So that's what I want to do. Throughout this Logic app, I want to send events into Azure Event Hub so that I can process some rich events. So let me show you a few things. For one, let me show you a sample event that we want to send. And this is going to get us more into the syntax as well. So here's a sample event that I want to send over to Azure Event Hub. I want to know what step has just happened. So in this case, the email has just been sent, right? So the Office 365 connector sent the email. And you'll notice here I'm using that @ sign a lot, which is the signal to the Logic App Engine that, hey, I'm going to pass in some custom syntax here. We've got our workflow definition language. And at runtime, it's going to substitute all these variables with the actual values. So you can kind of tell, and we can read through, you can understand what's happening. But if you want to see the full documentation, it's linked to throughout our documentation, but I've actually just added a quick URL here, aka.ms/logic-apps-docs, and you can check that out to see all of the conversion functions and logical functions and whatnot. But let's go ahead here. So we're saying we sent the mail. I want to know what time we're sending this event. I can pull in the action start time. So what time did I call that Office 365 API to send that email? What time did it finish? What was the status? if I had a bad input parameter, or if there was some issue going on, status could be failed, it could be skipped, it could be succeeded. I want to know that. I want to be able to track that. And so I'm calling that. I'm also going to pass in some values just about the workflow in general. Like you'll see tracking ID. That's an ID that we provide to help you correlate the different steps in your logic app with a single ID. So I want to keep that with all of my events, as well as information about the customer that I've just added, their location and their name. So that's an event that I'm going to be sending in Azure Event Hub. Now, I mentioned before that you can add custom APIs in addition to the APIs that we provide. And there's actually a custom API I'm going to leverage for this, which is an Event Hub API. It's actually right now in a resource that's really valuable to know. We actually have set up as a team a GitHub repository at github.com/logicappsio that allows you to come and see some code samples of what these connectors look like. We have a community section for you to submit your own API apps if you want to submit them for the community to see. But you'll see here we have like API apps like C# scripting and JavaScript, where you can add C# code directly into a logic app to execute, small snippets of code. But the one we're going to look at, I mentioned, is this Event Hub API. And the nice thing about GitHub is that there's this Deploy to Azure button. And what's great is that when you click that button after you authenticate and choose a resource group, it's going to go ahead and deploy this code directly into your subscription for you. So you don't even have to worry about cloning it and publishing it and whatnot. So before we started, I actually did just that. And you'll notice here's the Event Hub API ready for us to use. It's now in our resource group. And when I click this Event Hub API, it's going to add that in and read the Swagger and let us perform some actions. So let's send a message whenever we start the logic app. I want to know how many times we start this logic app. Now for the connection string, I've actually added a parameter inside of the definition for this logic app, so I don't have to share this with everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and add that syntax. The Event Hub name is logic app. And the message we want to send, let me just copy and paste. It's just like the one we just saw in the PowerPoint. The only difference is I've modified it for the start message instead of the Office 365 one. So let's go ahead and paste that. Now, by default, whenever you add a new action onto your workflow, it's going to be dependent on the action before it. So you'll notice right now, this Event Hub API is only going to execute if the service bus action has completed and it completes successfully. But you can override that, right? In this case, I want this to happen whenever we start a logic app. So I'm going to go ahead and say add a condition to be met for my own condition. And in this case, the condition I want is fire whenever we've started a logic app. Or another way to think of it is whenever the trigger is not empty, right? Whenever the trigger has values in it, that's when I want to fire this. So the syntax that I'll use is actually the @ and then I say not empty, and I'm going to pass in the trigger object. So that's the condition, right? So this will execute whenever that trigger is not empty, which means whenever the trigger is fired. And what's nice is when I actually commit these changes, you'll see the designer knows, hey, by the way, we're not actually executing there. We should show up around here, which is right, which is once this app starts, it's going to send the email, it's going to start that action, and in parallel at the same time, it's going to send off this message to Event Hub, which is great. So I could have multiple layers of parallel activities and if-then, exception handling, whatnot, without having to slow down my workflow at all. So let's go ahead and add one more Event Hub action. And we're going to send this one for after the Office completes, which is the one we looked at on that slide. So let's pass in the Event Hub connection string to our Logic App Event Hub. Let me copy this in. This is the same one we were looking at on that slide. Great. And let's change that condition because we want this one to happen. This is very similar to the last condition we saw where I'm going to say not empty. The difference here being instead of the trigger not being empty, I want to make sure that the Office action is not empty. So I'm going to use the actions function. And I'm going to pass in the ID of the connector, which is Office 365. Now, if I switch to code view, I can actually see the JSON definition, and I could see all of the IDs for these connectors. I can also highlight over this little I here, and you'll notice like this ID is to Raspberry Pi, right? I know the Office 365 one for my connector is the ID is Office 365. So I can go ahead and commit that. And while it's rearranging, I will explain a little bit about how there is a code view behind each of these logic apps, which is a JSON definition. And maybe actually I'll just show you as well. So let's save that and show you. And you can work in code view. The code right now is being generated automatically by the designer, But you see here, like here's my trigger section, and I'm saying, hey, I'm going to use the SQL connector and all these things. Now, the benefit of there being this definition file is you can actually embed Logic Apps definitions within a resource deployment script. So if you're deploying a lot of Logic Apps dynamically, or you want to move things or deploy into any resource group, you can use this code view to help you create that deployment script so you can deploy Logic Apps wherever or however you need. But for this, we've been able to do everything through the designer for us. So I could continue to finish in sending those events. I'm actually just going to switch to a view. This is the same exact Logic App. I've just taken the time ahead of time to add in those extra events. So you see here's all the event hubs and the different conditions, and it's the same pattern. I've just finished it out. All right, this is half of the story though. Okay, so now we have what once was adding customers to a database. Now we've integrated across all these services and devices, minus the Wi-Fi hiccups. And now we're sending rich events about what are we doing in this workflow. Now let's visualize it. Let's do something really exciting with this with Power BI and Stream Analytics. So Stream Analytics is a service that will digest your event hubs in real time. And event hubs are huge. They can be up to like 1 gigabyte a second of data. And Stream Analytics can run on top of your event hub, and you can write queries, just like the one I'm showing now, to comb over that data, perform calculations, and have conditions, and export in some pretty cool places. So let me walk you through this Stream Analytics job I've just set up. So I'm reading from my event hub that I'm sending all these events into, and I'm going to output actually into 2 different places. One is to Power BI, and the other one is to a service bus queue. And I talked about queues a little bit before. You'll see why we did this. But this looks just like SQL. You can see the whole functional language that they have. But you see I'm just grabbing like the step name, the timestamp, when did it start, when did it finish. And I can do some cool stuff like doing the date differential between the start time and the finish time to know how long did this action take. That's some cool stuff Stream Analytics lets you do. 2 other things I'll call out actually. One thing about Stream Analytics that's awesome is this tumbling window. And that's, you're able to go with Stream Analytics and say, hey, grab all of the events that I'm getting within, in this case, a 5-second window, and perform calculations on that window. So in this case, for every 5 seconds, I want to know what's the average duration in this window and how many objects am I getting? What's the count, right? Now I'm doing 5 seconds because I'm going to simulate this really fast. But if this was, you wanted daily or hourly, you could easily just change the syntax here for that. The other one I'll show you that this is a really useful way to leverage Stream Analytics with Logic Apps. And that's that you can input into a queue. So I can say, select everything and put it into a queue from my Logic app, which is that event hub, where the status is failed. So what this will do is if I ever send an event out where something has failed, maybe my Office 365 connector failed, Stream Analytics is going to right away add an item into my queue. And what's nice about this is I actually have a second Logic app. And whenever something is added into my queue, it will fire off and perform some events. So maybe you want a text alert or an email, or you want a log every time that there's a fail in your own ERP system or database, right? Stream Analytics and Logic Apps let that be super quick. So for this one, actually, the queue, I have a Logic app that is going to add it to this Raspberry Pi queue. Oh, there's our problem. It wasn't plugged in. See, the first thing, whenever you do debugging, is it plugged in? Did you restart it? Anyway, that's why it wasn't receiving messages. That's fine. We'll just ignore the Raspberry Pi, and now we're getting flashes. But anyway, whenever there's a failure, I am going to input into this queue. So ignoring this for now, let's switch over to Power BI. And this is honestly, we expired because I'm so long-winded. I've been talking so long. I want to show you this dashboard I created. And this is really exciting. Again, if you just think about where we started and where we are now, we're now looking at a dashboard that I created, which let me start this and we'll walk through it. So I've written a simple app, which is going to push 1,000 customers into my Logic app, okay? And so when those customers are being added, it's going to be pushing events into Azure Event Hub. And Stream Analytics is processing all those events from my Logic app. And real time, it will push those into our dashboard. So you see now our dashboard is lit up. And now real time, we are looking at not only how many steps we've completed, but we can see things like where our customers are coming from, how many customers we've added today. This is so exciting. Honestly, we started with adding customers into a SQL database. And within a few minutes, now we are looking real time at where those customers are coming from, how many customers we've added the day. We're assessing the health of our workflow. We even have some, I I actually programmed the app. 1 out of every 20 messages, it sends a failed message because I wanted to show you how you could track failures and have them show up on something like a Raspberry Pi. Unfortunately, since we had issues, you won't see this blinking. But we even have failures being tracked as well. And what's cool is now what was just adding customers into a SQL database, now we could even do things like saying, show location and count of tracking ID. Let's see if that works. And this query, there we go. Now we can even see insights like where are our customers coming from? And we can see we have the most customers out of the UK, then the US, Australia, and so on, right? So we've just turned what was something super simple into something extremely advanced very quickly through Logic Apps. This stuff honestly gets me really excited. I hope you understand the vision of what you can accomplish as you integrate across all these cloud services, right? As we continue to move into SaaS, into APIs, and our data spread across both the Azure cloud and other clouds, Logic Apps is a great way to tie those things together, to quickly integrate. What's nice too is if in 3 weeks, maybe I decide, whenever I had a customer, I also want to do another step. I want to post a message in a Slack channel. You can easily just open up your Logic app and add an additional step. I don't have to worry about redeploying code and finding and understanding the code because it's all managed in that nice designer. So I hope you have enjoyed this presentation, and I hope you take the chance to go and test out Logic Apps. And what's really fun is that we're just in preview, right? The best is yet to come. So jump on board while you still can. Share your experiences with us. Send us tweets. Send myself tweets. I'm more than happy to help answer questions as well. Feel free to send me an email. However I can help, I would love to. And thank you so much for joining.